First of all, let me thank each and every one of you for being here today. Let me say that it's a great honor to be here amongst you. Over the years, I've been a persistent organizer and activist for almost 40 years straight now. 40 years straight, a relentless activist pursuing injustice and going against the criminal class of this world. I'm a Native American activist. I'm a First Nations activist. I'm a Mohawk warrior from the Six Nations Iroquois Confederacy. I'm a warrior who believes in upholding the contents of the oldest living constitution in the world, known as the Guyanagoa, the Great Law. And that comes from us, the Iroquois Confederacy. This great law was brought to all of the people who come here from Europe, who came here to colonize, in the process of colonizing and stealing our land and murdering people with impunity. In the process of all this, in the time when there was a war between Canada and the United States, or one brewing between Great Britain and the United States. During that time, when the so-called founding fathers of the American Revolution put together a package to develop a constitution in the U.S., the first original draft into the American Constitution, Ben Franklin and the other so-called founding fathers, which to us at that time were the founding murderers of our continent. Still in all, there was a certain level of intelligence and decency to be able to recognize that our Guyanagoa was the greatest constitution in the world. And at that point, the Europeans coming from England and France and from Holland and from the rest of Spain and Portugal, they realized that we had a system that was not feudalistic, monarchistic, and we had one that truly delivered the process of democracy. We had the concept of the two-thirds majority vote, which the General Assembly uses in its decision-making bodies at the United Nations level. We introduced that to our European allies, or at that point they were enemies, but we tried to become allies and make peace. They also found the whole concept of the people's referendum. Whenever bad government gets in power, the people had the right to petition and pull those corrupt bastards out of the positions of power and bring them back in. The people had power. The whole congressional proceedings, the whole parliamentary proceedings came from the Great Law. Women's equality come from the Great Law. We were a matriarchal society. We were balanced, men and females, male and females. We were one, but we honored the women as the life givers in this creation and the caretakers of this earth. And therefore, they had equal power in government. The women imposed the chiefs because they showed enough of a balance between their own yin and yang, and they had rationale, the spiritual knowledge and political knowledge of what was good for the people. Yet if she empowered a chief, she also had the power to take his power, and ordering the war chiefs to take his power after 3 warnings if he was erring for his own self-aggrandizement. So we not only just recognize a woman's right to vote, which was such a big deal in the U.S., we recognize the equal political power of women within our nations in self-governing forms. So I say this. I am one who believes in this very beautiful democratic process that we gave to the world 700 years ago. I am one who defends the tenets of true democracy in our egalitarian societies. I am one that believes in defending against the encroachment of corruption, against the encroachment of mass murder and killing in the interest of a class of people who have gone completely out of balance with the natural laws of creation for their own greed and avarice. And that's who I am. I am a peacekeeper of the Confederacy. A warrior is a peacekeeper. And our war societies are in the Six Nations Confederacy. The war societies are there to protect the tenets of the great law, the oldest living constitution. And basically, the great law is the perfect document for a nation to be self-determining, for a nation to recognize the power of its own sovereignty, for a self-determining people to be free from any colonial forces or nations. In the Six Nations, the Mohawks predominantly, we fought 40 wars with the U.S., with the British, with the French, with the Spanish. We fought wars and we won many of those wars. Years ago, hundreds of years ago, right up to contemporary times, we fight, we win. Because what we stand for is for the good of human beings. We also believe, according to the laws of the great laws, the tenets of the great law, that our great law, one day it was foreseen that our great law would go around the world. It would be taken by the capitalist class of the United States, and it would be corrupted. Why, even our great law was the system, the Six Nations Confederacy, the Guyanagoa, the Iroquois system, was the system that Marx and Engels used in their treatise on communism or communalism. And that was done on the base, predicated on the writings of Lewis Henry Morgan, who lived amongst the Iroquois for 20 years. And when he documented that, they used that as a system that met the needs of the people and not just a class of people that had more than the rest of the people and exploited and imprisoned people in this exploitation. So, notwithstanding the political values, we were always told that one day this system, our system, the great law, would go around the world, but it would be corrupted because you can't mix communityism of the great law system with capitalism. It's like water and oil. They can exist in the same sphere, but they never mesh as one. Ours is a system based on equality, not on exploitation. And this is what we guard against the greedy elements in this foreign nations and societies. We are constantly in defense of our right to self-determination and sovereignty. Our duty is to protect that sovereignty anytime it's challenged and attacked. Now, I'm not going to go into a long history about all of the beginnings of my activism. So if you really want to know, I definitely got a bunch of books for you to purchase. I have some t-shirts there of some recent actions that I took in terms of trying to arrest war criminal George Bush in Calgary of this year. But I want to go back in history to 38 years ago today, September the 13th. I was in a prison known as Attica State Prison in New York. I was 19 years old. I was given a sentence before I went to prison of 8 years as a homeless, indigenous person in Buffalo, New York, sleeping in 30 below weather in hallways, no food, hungry, starving, persecuted by racists. And one night out of desperation, I attempted a robbery by putting my finger in my coat pocket and trying to hold up a store so I could eat. In the process, she yelled out for her brothers. There were apps, they found out later, there was a couple of mafioso types. They come running after me. I fell down. They snatched me. All I had was a submarine sandwich. I went to court, was told I was going to get probation, and then found out that they reneged on that. When I got into court, the judge, a staunch racist, looked at me and said, Mr. Boncory, savages like you belong in a cage.
Shame.
And I looked up. I was a young, innocent, a fairly innocent young guy. I never attempted any form of criminal activity. And then when I looked up, and then he said to me, he said, you were issued an 8-year sentence for an attempted robbery of a submarine sandwich. That became my sojourn in prison. Well, you know George Jackson? He went to jail for a $71 robbery. And we'll talk about him in a minute. On September the 13th, when I went to Attica, I eventually ended up in Attica. I was in 16 different prisons in New York State. At the age of 19, I ended up in Attica State Prison, 16 days before the infamous rebellion. One of the first people that I met when I was there was a man by the name of Sam Melville. You've heard of him? Have you heard of him? Sam Melville was known as the Mad Bomber, one of the Weather Underground peoples that was indicted and convicted in New York for blowing up corporations and military installations in solidarity with the Black Panther Party. In a time of very heightening and very strong militancy in the United States against the status quo. He was also involved in taking a strong position against the anti-war movement, which of course we all know years down the road was a false flag operation, the Gulf of Tonkin, and it was designed, 58,000 soldiers got killed, and McNamara himself basically admitted that it was a false flag operation. There was no basis plan for a ship being blown up in that harbor. And yet, they were over there for oil, gas, and all that's always been are resource wars. It's always been wars for resources. So now, there was a whole climate, there was a strengthening of what was known as the prison rights movement. Many black militants were coming in, brothers and sisters, man, from the Black Liberation Army, the Black Panthers, the Puerto Rican Young Lords, the anti-war movement peoples were coming through. There was a heightening of the social consciousness, and there was resistance to the status quo in America. And so there was millions of people mobilizing and beginning, man, to challenge, man, the status quo. Many of us began to see ourselves as political prisoners, or victims of a vicious economic system, just trying to survive. And many of you homeless folks know what I'm talking about. So here we are in the joint, and I was there 16 days beforehand. Sam Melville, man, was a prison organizer. He clandestinely, man, put out newsletters on pieces of paper, and we had the network going around, man, politicizing prisoners. I was one that he was trying to politicize. He was trying to teach me, because when I went in, I was pretty much just an a-conscious reactionary, in a sense. But I was young. I didn't know any better. But my learning came in the penitentiary. So the long and short is that I also met a person that you know well by the name of Martin Sostry. Have you heard of him? Martin Sostry was a black man who was an anarchist in New York State. He was a very, very recognized political prisoner worldwide. One thing, Martin Sostry and I were locked up in solitary confinement together, and the one thing I learned from Martin Sostry, here's a man I saw that every time they took him out for a visit, Martin Sostry, man, refused to allow them to degrade his integrity as a human being, to pull his pants down and force him to bend over and do a rectal search. And I watched, we locked right next to each other, and I watched every time he come back, they said, "Are you going to pull your pants down, nigga?" And he said, no, I won't. And next thing I know, they said, well, there's guards, the goon squad. They beat him senselessly, knocked him to the ground, and ripped it off. And in one case, they started a stick, a nightstick, which they called nigger sticks, up his ass. I looked at this and I was like, on the one hand, terrified of what they were doing to him, but on the other hand, I said, this man has got integrity. And I adopted his position, and I began to do the same thing he did and started getting attacked for not allowing them to do rectal searches on me and dehumanize me, make me bend over. I said, eventually I would tell them in my fights, continual fights with them, if you want to look up my ass, you get on the ground and you look up. You get on the ground and you look up. That's the only way you're going to look up my ass. So that began my struggling thing. But anyways, we talked about years and years of repression, about the Ku Klux Klan and John Birchers that ran the penal system, beating and killing with impunity and throwing people in unmarked graves. We talked about the RX program that they had in Dannemora State Prison, a place called Clinton on the Montreal border, upstate New York, with Nazi-type physicians, creating for anybody that took on a militant posture, a revolutionary posture. They were assigned back to be thrown into the solitary confinement, beaten, and then after they were beaten, they waited for their operation, and the physicians committed frontal lobe or lobotomies on militant, powerful militant brothers, and at the end of it, those militant warriors you saw, one day after the operation, you saw this. Let's not underestimate the fascist evil of the classes that we're dealing with. Let's not underestimate, let's not romanticize this movement, this struggle, because there are some serious evil bastards that are in control in the fascist police states that we live in. Putting all this out, trying to get redressed with the Attica Liberation Front, we tried to get all this stuff addressed humanely, and of course they would never hear us humanely. So one day there was a struggle out in the yard. Well, there was a football thing going on. In the yard, you couldn't fraternize more than 3 people at a time. Otherwise, you were locked up, thrown into the box. And there was a football game going on. A white brother and a black brother were scrimmaging. All of a sudden, this lieutenant walks out in the yard and says, "Lock that fucking nigger up now." But they never say nothing about the white guy. So then the black guy, when they went to get him, and I was pushing some weights on the Indian bar, everybody had their own areas. So the natives from upstate New York in Attica were pushing iron, and I was struggling with a couple 100 pounds, because I just started out in it, doing bench presses. And my friend, this big Indian guy named Lenny from Rochester, said, "Hey, did you see that?" I said, "Did I see what?" "What?" And I put down the bars, and just as I got up, the black brother, man, was getting just held up and punched. He was a Panther brother. He punched the lieutenant in the mouth again. I said, "Whoa." Now, I like that. You're damn right I like that. Yes. Because you got to remember, and I haven't told the whole story, about the years I was in residential type schools, and I was getting beaten and tortured and raped by these evil sons of bitches, or sons of animals. And I don't mean to be demeaning with the sisterhood, please. Don't misinterpret that. I am full respect to the sisterhood, and I am totally non-racist and non-sexist. And you can believe that. And also, I just want to make that clear so that it doesn't get misinterpreted, because sometimes these things do get misinterpreted. But these bastards, I learned a long time ago, and I understood a long time ago why women who have been victims at the other end of victims of rape, I understood why when they say enough is enough, and when they say no, they mean no. And at that point, But there's anger that comes after being degraded. There's so much anger and hatred once you get over the fear of the terrorizing of somebody forcing himself on you. Or a priest telling you in these schools, residential schools, that Jesus loves you while he takes a crucifix and tries to shove it up your ass. Now I can understand why Sister Emma Goldman hated the church in the state and took issue with them. And so did Brother Wilhelm Reich. And if you have not read this book, The Mass Psychology of Fascism by Wilhelm Reich, you must read it. It's a must read. It's a must read. Anyways, the guards took those guys out. Now, oh, by the way, when I said, yeah, I'm openly admitted that I put the bars down and I jumped up. Everybody, for the first time, lost the fear. And we all came and supported these two guys. The white guy said, if you lock him up, you lock me up. The lieutenant saw, and all the goon squad seen us all surround him. And as we surrounded him, the lieutenant started getting scared. So the lieutenant says, well, I give you my Eagle Scout's honor. We won't lock him up. I reached out and smacked him in the face. I said, screw your goddamn Eagle Scout's honor. It don't mean nothing to us. Nothing. That's okay. That's okay. You can take courage with that. You can take, because these guys, I've just told you that they killed with impunity. They put people in unmarked graves. Now we're saying you're not going to do that no more. So I hit them. These guys, they only had 16 days to know who I was. They didn't know who I was. Final analysis, we all went back to the cells. The guards were going down looking for certain people. They took those other two guys. They were looking for me, but they couldn't identify me. So they went past me. They took those guys out of their cell that night. The next day, the whole word went around the prison grapevine. Don't take any food. Don't take any food, and don't work a work strike. Because, you know, we were working in prison industries, making millions of dollars of profits for the things that were created out of the industry. Guess how much we got paid a day? Huh? 2 cents. 2 cents a day. And all the free contaminated junk tobacco you could use with Indian names like Seneca and Cayuga tobacco products. I'm breezing through this. We decided at that point, we grabbed, when we came out of that, nobody took food. There was total silence. The cops were sitting there behind the walls. You could hear the keys shaking. They were nervous. At that point, we could smell their fear. And that started to empower us. Black, white, Hispanic, Native, Indigenous, Oriental, Asian. We all felt our power at that time. We felt the power of unity. At that point, there was no turning back. We went to go outside. They had everything closed up. They tried to lock us up. A couple of Panther brothers were walking down the hall, and Sam Melville, a white brother, the Weather Underground brother. Walking down the hallway, all these cops come down, up the hall. The Panther brothers said, what happened to those two brothers last night? 6'5", 240 pounds of muscle. They said, well, we don't know, fellas. Boom, the Panther drops them. Bam! Sam Melville comes in and kicks their ribs in. I turned around and said, this is it. Take this fucking place now. Attica! When we started grabbing hostages. We started throwing them in prison inmate clothes so they couldn't be distinguished between hostages, because we knew the state was going to mobilize their military forces, their police forces to come in fully loaded with guns, and we were getting ready, man, to make a complete defense. This is it. So when we started running down the halls, we started overturning everything over there inside A block. By the time we got down to the gates, they were all closed off. They stopped us from getting the other 3/4. Eventually, what we did was 60 of us kept pulling on the steel gate. And I can tell you, as we pulled on that gate, that the muscle power and the willpower, we snatched that gate right out of the wall, and the walls came tumbling down. Oh, the official report said it was a defective weld. Don't you believe that? Don't you believe that? Because they don't want you to know how strong we are, how powerful we are when we start to march and demand our freedom and integrity and to put these people in place. They don't want you to know what our power is. United. We held the place for 5 days. We set up negotiating tables. We had 50 hostages all throughout the yard. We set up, organized, all people were organized in defensive posture. Everybody had our homemade weapons ready for a confrontation. 5 days, every day. We ripped the commissary off, and everybody ate kippers and cheese, but we fed the hostages better than we fed ourselves. And then we made demands on the world. Well, many of the demands on the world were really reformist, and then a lot of us said, hey, we're not about reform. We don't want to make prisons comfortable. We want prisons to be abolished and tear them down brick by brick. Because we know that if you feed the people, if you meet the people's housing, their food, their clothing, their economic necessities in a society that meets their necessities, there would be no need for prisons. And that we know. We had many peoples. William Kunstler, the famous civil rights attorney. Bobby Seals came in. We brought everybody in. We had ABC, CBC, CBS and NBC, all the major networks and papers. They were allowed to come in, which is never going to happen again. We had live filming of what we were about, our negotiations. The whole world heard about Attica. The whole world thought it was the beginning of the revolution, the worldwide revolution. It inspired the activities of Black September in overseas, the Palestinian peoples. Everywhere around the world there were banners, Attica, Attica, Attica. After 5 days of negotiation, Nelson Rockefeller, the governor at that time, said, that's it, we're taking the president back. 13 years ago today, 38 years ago today. As we spent the night before, it was raining, drizzling. And as it was raining and drizzling, everyone knew something was going to happen the next day. So there we are the next morning. There was the trenches, and people used as urinals to defecate in big trenches that we dug out. The water they turned off, the power they turned off that morning. And on that morning, there was a helicopter came flying over the prison. As it flew over the prison, it said, drop your arms and put your hands on top of your head and surrender to an officer, and you will not be harmed. As it flew over, this Army helicopter flew over 2 or 3 times. On the 3rd time it came back around, all of a sudden out of that helicopter came a huge barrel filled with CN4 gas. Boom. It just sprayed all over the place. Boom. It sprayed all over the place. It was condemned. It was poison. It was chemical warfare. They came back around and dropped 5 more canisters. On top of the catwalks, there was 1,000 state troopers with gas masks on. Guards from their own house with their own guns. They had the guards, the state troopers had every kind of weapon you could think of, including a 2.7 elephant gun, sub-Tommy machine guns. All of a sudden, when they dropped the 3rd canister of gas, they started firing into the yard, and in a matter of 10 minutes, they had fired over 70,000 rounds of bullets into the yard. People were being shot in the head, in the guts. People were screaming for their lives. People were being massacred as they advanced themselves onto us and come running into that yard. They started shooting people with impunity. They killed 11 of their own guards that were in inmate clothing. There was a blood feast. There was a bloodbath. That's 38 years ago today. That's what happened in this history. People were forced to lie on the ground and crawl. They grabbed people and threw them inside the urinals, right there with their face in the shit and the piss, and they put their guns behind their head and they executed them. One guy, they pulled his pants down and stuck a shotgun up his ass and blew his bowels out. This is who we're dealing with, people. This is who we're dealing with. This is who we're dealing with. People made to crawl on the floor, on the ground, run through hallways on glass, and beaten in their testicles and brains. The massacre was seen around the world. Eventually, 61 of us were indicted. I was indicted for killing a cop when we broke those gates down. Really, for the sake of time, we skipped. Sake of time, we ended up we became known as the Attica Brothers. We all ended up on trial, 61 of us indicted. I was the #1 indictment. I was the only one convicted for allegedly killing this cop. I was facing the electric chair. I almost went to the electric chair in Sing Sing prison. All the particulars are in my book. You have got to get it. But the point I'm making here, Nelson Rockefeller was facing confirmation in 1973-74 as Vice President of the United States with Gerald Ford. He ordered the Attorney General's office to suppress any evidence going into a second grand jury for the murders that they committed. There was a guy by the name of Malcolm Bell, who was one of the Attica prosecutors. When he found this out, he refused and he became a whistleblower. He wrote a 60-page document to the New York Times. They sat on that document until after I was convicted. I went to jail with the stigma of being a cop killer. Every cop wanted to kill me inside of those prisons. I existed 6 more years in prisons with 7 attempts to murder me. They ruled the death penalty unconstitutional, so I didn't go to the electric chair. But the point is that they had a commission, and the commission man found that Rockefeller man had suppressed this jury tampering. And eventually the seceding governor, Hugh Carey, he granted a blanket amnesty to all the cops for the murders, including the guards that went in. He suspended the rest of the indictments against the rest of the Attica brothers. They gave me an executive clemency on the strength of a governor's recommendation. I should have been released. Well, when I went before the parole board for the first time in the history in New York, because the guy that was facing confirmation as the head of the parole board was threatened by state senators that if he released me, and a national strike by the prison guards union all across the country, that if they released me, that he wouldn't get confirmed for a $62,000 post. Bam! Next thing you know, I was denied parole, given 2 more years. I became known as the only person convicted as a result of the Attica brother. 2 years later, I was released. And I'm here to talk to you today. When I was out, I was involved in a number of things. In May of 79. I'm just going to skip along and highlight because I have everything of my life critiqued in my autobiography. In 1995, I became a Sundance chief. Appraised in 1995, I was up here, Gustafson Lake, along with my brother Wolverine. And by the way, I want to make a special announcement, recognition of my sister, Sheila Franklin. Are you around here somewhere, Sheila? Where's Sheila? Sheila. Hey, stand up, Sheila. Everybody turn around, look at this beautiful sister over here. Come on, stand up. Get up. Sheila Franklin is one of the Gustafson Lake defenders right there. Give her a hand, please. The whole story in a very quick nutshell, because we only got very serious time constraint. I have to jump to something else. There was an incident that went on up at 100 Mile House while we were doing the Sundance. We were told that we were not wanted up there. They came in with guns and a truck and said that that we had to vacate the area while we were doing the Sundance, and they threatened to string up some red niggers that day. On that day, I basically told them, even if this is a month before Wolverine come up, I told them, I said, as far as I'm concerned, this wasn't a land title issue, but just now with that threat, we're going to turn this into the whole question of title in unsurrendered Indian land in British Columbia. And according to all of the meticulous and the great legal research done by Dr. Bruce Clark, then we did the whole analysis that BC was still under the treaties of the 1763 Royal Proclamation, the 1704 Queen Anne's. It even went back, the Queen Anne's decision, it even went back to the 1875 duty of disallowance, and it even went back as far back as the 1532 subliminal deus. Now, if you don't know what that is, it's a Vatican Papal Bull. And in that bull, basically, it basically was Bartholomew de las Casas asking the Pope Paul III, asked him to rescind the 1497 Tierra Nullis. Tierra Nullis was basically that the European nations had the right of divine right to go into any land and to seize that land in the name of Christianity, and murdered and killed. Over 100 million Indians died as a result of that. Bartholomew de las Casas was down there in Central America, and he was a priest that saw these murders, and he said, and he begged the Pope, please reverse this policy. It's just giving them the right to kill. And I watched 100,000 people murdered in cold blood, and people burned at the stakes by the thousands, like the women's burned at the stake by the thousands in Europe by this Spanish and this Church Inquisition. Fortunately, they reversed that for 1532 and then said that before any imperial nation could colonize or seize that land, that they in fact had to do a legal basis with the indigenous peoples and no longer considered them animals of the woods, and that they were intelligent and had the right to negotiate either by a land surrender and or by a peaceful land surrender or the equivalent to buying the land. And that really is the basis of the 1763 Royal Proclamation. So we drew the line in the sand. We held the place for 78 days. Again, there's so much to deal with over there. There was a standoff. We were involved in a number of shootouts with each other. But I had told the operations commanders of that Operation Wallaby up at Gustavus Lake that if you come in here, that if anybody gets killed in Gustavus Lake, that there will be a nationwide call for the war societies all across the countries to go to war with Canada. And we, in fact, will not stop until we win complete independence and entitlement is reaffirmed in our right to self-determining nations of unsurrendered Indian lands. The state fired thousands and thousands of rounds, but they were told, if there's a shootout, don't you kill nobody. So most of those rounds were shot above the head. One woman by the name of Sullivan Bronson was shot in the arm, but that's because apparently she was running with something in her hand and they saw it as a threat because it was too close, so they hit her. But the fact is that they also understood that this thing could have got really out of control because there was a solidarity. There was a solidarity occupation over at Stony Point, and they killed Dudley George. When that happened, they knew we were in formation. We were ready to go. But I heard that they had actually shot Sullivan Bronson. I thought she was dead. I put out the word, if she is dead, it's an all-out war. CSIS records it in its, all the CSIS intelligence is in that book. Going forward. And today, on March the 17th of this year, I've been actively involved in trying to expose 9/11 situation has an inside job because of this bogus war on terror that gives them unbridled right to go in to kill with impunity against so-called terrorists. Now listen to this. Prior to that, there was unbridled attacks against the communists. Prior to that, there was unbridled attacks against the barbarian savages of North America. Anytime we can be played out by the powers that be because of labelings for fear of being called a conspiratorial kook or anti-Semitic. They're calling us anti-Semitic while they're killing the Semite peoples by the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and making them refugees in their own land. We can't be played out of focus. We can't be played out of focus for fear of not being seen as politically correct. Look at the realities. Now let's look at the realities of struggle. I'm going to ask somebody to come up here and do me a favor and read this page here for me. I need someone to do that right now. My voice is going. Would somebody come up here and do it? Come here, brother. I want you to read that whole page and the next page.
Right out loud?
Out loud. Speak here.
Thank you.
I'll hold it.
Medieval torture is not a partisan issue. Medieval torture is an American issue. After being waterboarded 183 times in 1 month, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed subsequently confessed to 9/11, the assassinations of both Kennedys, Jack the Ripper's murder, the blowing of Hindenburg, blowing up of Challenger, blowing up of Columbia, disguising himself as an iceberg to destroy the Titanic, the crucifixion of Christ, and the extinction of the dinosaurs. This is not a joke. Torture has long since been known as, from the times of the Catholic Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition, the Bolshevik Revolution, as is about getting the confession, not the truth. One has to wonder just how many sick pieces of work in this government are getting immense pleasure from seeing these photos and reading these reports, some of which are too disgusting for me to mention. Truly civilized and moralized Americans would have refused to order this or participate in this. And why? Because, number one, they use torture by the U.S. for all intents and purposes, pulls the U.S. out of any and all human rights treaties to which the U.S. has ever been a signatory, including the Geneva Accords. The use of torture by the U.S. is completely unethical to every human or American moral value expressed by the Constitution and Bill of Rights. 3. The use of torture by the U.S. has made the U.S. into laughingstock to the civilized world for its brazen hypocrisy. The global message is now crystal clear. The civilized world understands that any values or leadership talks about wanting to export like democracy, human rights, and human dignity are the same values of the U.S. actually holds in the most despicable contempt. The use of torture by the U.S. against foreign nationals and military gives other countries cartel branch to torture U.S. foreign nationals and U.S. military personnel. Anyone who has family members or friends in the U.S. military community, that last one should put a shiver up your spine. Excuse me. The problem with the U.S. government having, for all intents and purposes, walked away from the observing of the Geneva Conventions and the current government's refusal to hold war criminals, profiteers like Richard Bruce Cheney, George Walker Bush, and Donald Rumsfeld accountable for anything they have done are multifold, and President Obama's cowardice speaks for itself. First, no U.S. government official can ever again speak with a straight face about human rights, human dignity, and freedom until the world's most reviled war criminals are given a fair trial. That would be obscene hypocrisy. And secondly, by institutionalizing medieval-style torture, any American man, woman, or child, either civilian or military, who gets captured or arrested by any foreign government can expect no better treatment than what is meted out at Abu Ghraib or Guantanamo by Americans. Chew on that for a while. In spite of all this, documented truth and empirical evidence can no longer be censored by American propaganda medias like the sleazy Fox News. Richard Bruce Cheney and George Walker Bush used secrecy, fear, deception, intimidation, projectionism, and lies to galvanize public opinion and deceive the U.S. into the support of their unwanted, unnecessary Nazi-style invasion of Iraq, and they tortured people to get false confessions as an excuse for it. 1. Iraq never had anything to do with 9/11. 2. Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction. 3. Iraq had no nuclear weapons. 4. Iraq had no connection to Al-Qaeda. 5. Iraq did not purchase any enriched uranium for Niger. 6. The Center for Public Integrity documented over 935 lies from Cheney, Bush, Rumsfeld, and Rice during the Bush tenure, and that was only 6 months worth of compiled lies.
Thank you very much. That's good, brother. That's good enough. Thank you very much. That was really good reading. Thank you, brother. All right, listen. So here's what happens, okay? And I'm going to be real quick. Somebody give me a time check. What are we looking at?
5 minutes.
Huh?
5 minutes.
5 minutes? All right, here's wrap up. There's wrap up. My brother Steve here and Paul, they're documenting this because the other night I did a talk and I missed some of these components that we needed to get in there. So that's why we had to get it, because we've got a very powerful document coming out on the very soon about an action I took here in March, and to draw attention to the torture and to the murders that were committed by the Bush-Cheney administration. And so we needed to get that information in. But here's what happened on March the 17th. On March the 17th, I had been reading prior to then a call out by the Lawyers Against War to ban George Bush from coming into this country. He was going to speak at the TELUS Convention Center in Calgary, Alberta. And there was going to be 1,500 people at a luncheon paying $400 a plate to hear him speak, with him getting a $200 honorarium. I mean, $200,000 honorarium. I, at that point, concurred with Gail Davison and the Lawyers Against War and said that this guy should, according to Canadian law, the Immigrations and Refugee Act, he should not be a credibly accused war criminal, is not allowed in this country. They used that same law to keep George Galloway out of this country when he was coming in to speak about the supplies and the money that he brought to all those people who have been bombed by U.S.-sponsored and Canadian-produced white phosphorus bombs. 2,000 Palestinians just recently murdered in cold blood by the partners of the United States government, the Israeli government, backed with Canadian and U.S. military weapons and chemical weapons, and as well as Canada's air machines, bombers. The point I'm making here is that I, having realized seen all those images of those people tortured, having been a political prisoner that was tortured and almost murdered on a number of fronts, at that point I intended to take the position that he was not allowed in Canada as a war criminal. On March the 17th, I went there with 700 people, and we had a spirited demonstration to stop him from coming in. He came in, and we demanded that he be arrested. I told the RCMP that if they didn't arrest him, 2 times, if you don't arrest him, I'm empowering myself to go in there and snatch that guy and arrest him and take him to a people's camp until we develop a Nuremberg-type trial for war crimes, to find him, to give him his day in court, to bring up charges and to document all the charges, and then the people will mete out the sentences appropriate match to this war crimes. And the sentence, whether we want to deal with it or not, the sentence is the sentence of death. These war criminals must die by execution for the crimes they're committing with a bogus war on terror that they've committed. That's just a footnote. And don't be afraid to understand the realities that these people are going to be called to order. Call it what you want. Try to set me up for anything you want and say that he said this and he said that. But let me tell you something. I am thoroughly committed. So committed that now George Bush is actually coming back in to 3 places. In Saskatoon, and a brother from over there named Peter Garden is going to put up a massive demonstration to keep him out. He's going to Montreal. They're organized against his visit over there in Montreal. As well as in Edmonton, they're organizing to stop him there. But I want to also say that the real criminal in that cabal, which in 9/11 was really, and you can listen to the tapes that are coming up, but in 9/11 was really a coup d'etat. And it was a coup d'etat by Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, Richard Pearl, and the generals that Eberhardt and Myers. And you'll see that when you get online soon enough, you'll hear that whole story. But Dick Cheney's coming apparently to British Columbia on October the 22nd, allegedly to come over here for a week of fly fishing in Smithers. Well, I want you to know, and I'm asking you to join me in telling Dick Cheney You're not welcome here. We need to arrest them because Dick Cheney is really coming here to check out the vested interest of Enbridge and the Trans-Canada Pipeline going through indigenous territories, and that pipeline is going there for Exxon and Chevron, and it's going to be shipped out through the Skeena River, killing the salmon runs, and run over into China, just like in the Caspian Sea Basin, which was the reason that they really went over to Iraq and Afghanistan. The Caspian Sea is all earmarked for Chevron, BP, Exxon, and guess what? Alberta oil. And now we're over there exporting democracy? Bullshit. Bullshit. Now, I'll tell you what I'm going to tell. A special message right now to Dick Cheney. You're not welcome in this province. You're not welcome in Canada. We're going to do everything we can to mobilize. Come on, tell them we're going to mobilize against you. Come on. We're going to mobilize against you. And because these people, we have all put you on the no-fly list. The no-fly list? No-fly fishing. Being a little humor to it. Brothers and sisters, I like to respect my time restraints. There is so much more. I'm asking you to really help me. Look, I'm going on trial March 8th through the 12th. I face 6 months in jail. You know, and I know, that they want to kill me, and they will try to kill me. My voice is reaching too many people. That's just something that comes along with being an activist with a conscience. But you don't worry about that. In my book, I tell you how I got over the fear of dying. I'm asking you to help me out. I need you to buy my t-shirts and my book. Please, if you don't have enough to buy it, make me an offer. It's going towards my defense for March of next year. I will really make an appeal to the anarchist community because I have my base in Calgary are anarchists that are mobilizing on my behalf to raise funds for me and to stop that court in what could be the biggest political trial in Canada's history. I intended to arrest George Bush. I broke the line, and I was very close to getting into there, to grabbing him, apprehending him, and bringing him to justice before you people here. You that know what's really going on. When I went to the penitentiary, the Calgary police station, they beat me up. And then all of a sudden, they didn't really know who I was. And all of a sudden, somebody says, "Hey, leave him alone. His lawyer's on the phone, Ramsey Clark," the former U.S. Attorney General. Notwithstanding, he's been a friend of mine for years. As a matter of fact, Ramsey is the one that got me out of prison. And we've been brothers and friends since. So brothers and sisters, I'm appealing to you to help me. I'll help you in this fight for liberation. There's so much more that you can learn from that book. Is a textbook for resistance. Buy the t-shirt, like the t-shirts that are being worn around here. Let people know you support me. Because if they know I got support, they'll be reluctant to make the kill. But if you show there is no support, then the kill is imminent. But I, again, say, I'm not afraid. You know why? Because the greatest thing to me, after I attempted to arrest George Bush, and let me tell you something, I really felt good. I mean, I felt good. Because when I broke that police line, there were Blackwater snipers all over the place in guerrilla fatigues and balaclavas and fully sniper rifles that could have shot and killed me on the spot. Or they could have tasered me to death. And yet it didn't happen. And I survived it, and I said, phew, good. But I raised the bar of resistance. I raised the bar of resistance. But the greatest thing that happened of all, and people around the world hailed me as a hero, as they did with the brother that threw the shoe at him. Two of them. Gave him the left and gave him the right. And hopefully he hadn't changed his socks for a couple days. But you got to admit, though, Bush was kind of cool, wasn't he? I mean, he weaved. At least he could weave. But I wish he had gotten bopped right inside the head. In any event, the point is the greatest thing that happened to me that day, when I finally got the call, after they roughed me up in the joint, and I finally got a phone call, and I called home, and my little son, because it all went on national TV, my son, Chase Thunder. Dad, did you really try to arrest Bush? All my friends think you're the coolest thing going. That's 12-year-old boys and girls. You know what that means? That means even those little people, they know who the enemy is, just like we do. And that's why I say, let's join hands. Let's join our forces together. Black, white, Asian, everybody. Let's join together and show the powers who the real power is. That's you and me. Thank you.